Welcome back to another episode of The Engine Room. I'm your host, Diego Montalvan. Today, I am joined by Buga and Peter Galindo to talk about Canada and their team that is now finally going back to the World Cup. First of all, Peter, how's it going?
Diego, lovely to be back with you on a platform like this. It's been a while, so this should be a lot of fun here.
Buga, how's it going, man?
¿Cómo están? ¿Cómo están? Yes, very excited. We're going to be covering, like you know, the World Cup 32 teams. And I think Canada is a good place to begin with.
Absolutely. Now, Peter, first off, let me say congratulations because obviously Canada's in the World Cup. So congratulations. Haven't been since 1986. How does it feel for you?
I think it felt the same way we all felt 4 years ago when Peru qualified finally for the first time after 36 years itself. And it's funny, too, because there's a lot of parallels between both journeys. No one really saw it coming. It took an unprecedented run that no one saw coming to eventually get to that World Cup. And it almost feels like, even though there are no expectations, I feel, for Canada in 2022, much like there were very little expectations for Peru in 2018, they're almost like a team of destiny because they're now playing with house money. So that's almost what makes this extra special, is that now that they've kind of made it, there's very little pressure to actually do anything, whereas they're now in a group with teams who are expected to do something. So that's kind of the nice angle of it all.
And what are the people in Canada saying?
Just how transformative qualifying for a men's World Cup can be, because the women's program has had a lot of success over the last decade or so. And some would argue that, and in fact, I think they'd be right, that their success almost catapulted the men into this position because it was John Herdman who rebuilt that program. And now he's rebuilt the men's program. And so a lot of people are very optimistic that maybe this is the time when soccer, football in this country almost gets taken to another level, because there are more and more players going to Europe. The fact that the men have qualified and are now playing against some pretty marquee teams is only going to help boost the profile. So this is almost seen as something that could have lasting ramifications now, as well as maybe even 10, 15 years from now, even amidst all the labor disputes and talk of, well, where's all the World Cup prize money actually going to? The thought is that there are going to be a lot more revenues, at least across Canada soccer, so that at the very least, the sport in this country, not just the men's and women's national teams, are going to profit off of this.
You speak of a change, right? And there's many people that don't know what went on behind the scenes. So can you tell me a little bit about, the changes that were made, and now obviously with that comes new expectations? Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, both of you are probably going to be well versed in this, because as I said, the story with Canada is almost identical to Peru's, in that before John Herdman was appointed as coach, there was a very pessimistic attitude when it came to the national team. Oh, why always us? We're never going to go anywhere as long as X, Y, and Z stays the same. And it was almost a case of they take one step forward, but then inevitably take two steps back. But then just like Ricardo Gareca, when he was appointed as coach for Peru, he basically asked the question, well, why not us? Why can't we be great? We have a lot of talent here. And he really lifted the spirits of Peruvian football, even though there were a lot of problems behind the scenes, as we all know, and there still are, and inevitably led to his departure in a lot of ways. But it's the same thing with Canada, in that, why can't we be great? Why do we play for the shirt? What does it mean to you? And all of these philosophical things, I know, are always very cliche, but a lot of players said that they got very emotional when they were talking about it, and they almost felt a new sense of pride of playing for the national team. And that, plus the fact that they slowly but surely, I think, started to build a tactical identity and really lock down how they wanted to play, starting from the very first round of World Cup qualifying all the way up to where they are now, I think has made an instant difference. Now, having some world-class players like Alphonso Davies has helped, of course, but outside of him and maybe Jonathan David, possibly Stefan Eustáquio, a lot of these players are MLS-based or are playing in smaller leagues. So that's almost what makes this accomplishment incredible, much like Peru's, because as we saw, The only country in South America with fewer tier 1 or top level players was Bolivia. So for Gareca to do what he did is incredible. Just like with John Herdman, what he has done at the end of the day is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, moving on to the World Cup, to the main course, the main dish already. The Canucks are in Group F, right? Alongside Belgium, Morocco, Croatia. Big teams. How do you feel about that group? What are your expectations?
I flip-flop with this every day, let me tell you, because I feel like whenever you talk to the Canadian players or to John Herdman or to whoever is tied with this team, you come away from that conversation feeling optimistic about their chances. But then you watch those other teams, or you watch them, say, in a game against Uruguay, where, okay, they did hold their own and they certainly did compete, but those moments of individual quality from Darwin Núñez, from Nicolas de la Cruz, ultimately made the difference. So it makes you think, do they have that in their arsenal? Can they really put away those one or two, even just half chances away, like a Darwin Núñez could against Canada? And that is where I think they might fall a little bit short. Like I said, they're playing with house money. They have Belgium first, so they have the toughest test, you could argue, right away. Anything from that game is a bonus. From there, you have slightly more and more winnable games, not to say that they're going to be easy, against Croatia and Morocco. I feel like if they can somehow, some way get a point, just grind it out, which they've been known to do during CONCACAF qualifying against either of those teams, which is possible because you never know, slow starts and whatnot, then they can set themselves up for a must-win game against Morocco at the end of the group stage, and then with 4 points, possibly get through. But I feel like in my head, I'm not expecting them to get through, but they're going to be one of those teams that are going to be difficult to beat, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Diego, if you allow me to jump in there, what is going to be the sort of style of play or the sort of expectation that fans have of the way that Canada is going to be playing? So I'm not, like I say, the most knowledgeable when it comes to, let's say, what does Canada put up out there on the field, but are you going with the expectation of similar, making that parallel to Peru? Ricardo Gareca wanted to go out there and like play teams just with the same way that they have been playing in qualifiers, or you think that the manager will adapt a little bit to try and let's say counteract these bigger nations?
I think they will, in a way, almost go with that Gareca-like philosophy, and that they will try to play their way. And what's interesting is, this is why I feel like it's almost both of those answers put together. They're very tactically fluid. They have switched between a 3-5-2 to a 3-4-3 to a 4-4-2, all in game. And really whatever game state is thrown at them, they can adapt to it, and they have the personnel to do it. So that's what I think makes them such a tough team to come up against, because especially when you have the Davies and the Davids and the Eustachios and the Buchanans of the world who can give you that little bit of quality, or in Eustachio's case, maybe slow the game down a bit, speed it up as he sees fit. That can really help them. I imagine they're going to go with a trio in the midfield, just because the way they set up against Uruguay with a double pivot, they got overrun a lot. And against Belgium and Croatia especially, even Morocco, who plays with a trio, that's going to be a problem. So I feel like they're going to go with a 3. They're probably going to go, I would imagine, a 3-5-2 with Davies in a free rollout, sort of on the left, occasionally coming in central. Jonathan David partners him, similar to what we saw for most of the qualifiers until maybe the second half of that campaign when Herdman switched to a 3-4-3. But that's what makes this team so kind of intriguing and also difficult to read, is that you almost never know how they're going to approach games, and even sometimes what personnel they're going to throw out there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that they grinded out games, right? But I was also looking at stats. Kyle Aaron and Jonathan David, 13 and 9 goals respectively, if I remember correctly, number 1 and number 2 on the CONMEBOL qualifier charts. So, I mean, they got goals. So, Group F should worry at least a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, 100% they should. And even with Kyle Aaron maybe not playing a lot at Club Brugge this season, the 2 or 3 games he's come in for Canada, he's still not skipped a beat, which is probably why he might end up retaining his place for that opening game against Belgium, especially because that's the country he plays in too. So I'm sure there's going to be a little familiarity there with a couple of players at least. So that is certainly a factor here. And that's why I think a lot of teams are almost going to set up to almost at times dare Canada to break them down. Because in transition, they're going to be a major threat. A lot of their best players, understandably, are on the wings. In Buchanan, in Davies, even the fullbacks in Alistair Johnston or Richie Larea or Sam Adekubi are very dynamic going forward. So there's probably going to be a sense of, okay, let's try to take the game to them. Let's try to press them high, because the center backs, for the most part, are not the most comfortable playing out of the back under pressure. Apart from Kamal Miller, possibly. He's pretty composed back there. So let's maybe try to unsettle them a little bit, break up their lines, maybe get a goal, and then sit back against them and dare them to break us down, because they do struggle at times trying to break down those low blocks, as we saw at times during the qualifiers, specifically in Central America when they were playing El Salvador or Honduras or whoever it was in that region. So I feel like that's what's going to be so intriguing, is that the threat is definitely there, which is what's going to make teams at times almost say, listen, let's not take any risks, because if they hit us in transition, we could really pay for it.
I mean, yeah, fair. So, all right. You mentioned already also that the chances, you're playing with house money, you don't have a lot of expectations. But if you had to rate it 1 through 10, the chances of getting out of the group, right? And what do you think is the most important match?
That is a great question. I'll start with the scale of 1 to 10. I'm going to put it at a 4 right now, just because of there are still some questions in terms of midfielders and fitness and whatnot, because some of those MLS guys are going to be out of season. They're not going to play for 4 or 5 weeks. That might affect things a little bit. And just the fact that they do have 2 very tough games to start off things, I think. I feel like that Morocco game does not matter unless they get a point against one of Belgium or Croatia. I feel like it could be against Belgium. I know that's crazy to say, but having seen Croatia, the fluidity they play with, that midfield domination they have, led by Luka Modric and Mateo Kovacic and Marcelo Brozovic, if he is fit and is starting, that's going to be a very difficult match to play through. Even someone like Ivan Perisic running up and down the wing is going to cause problems. Belgium, the fact that they have a slightly older defense who aren't the quickest anymore. Canada is a young, dynamic team that could maybe play in their favor. And they play with predominantly a double pivot. And it looks like, at least throughout Nations League, they haven't quite figured out, A, who their best pairing is, and B, how are we going to set up off the ball? How are we going to set up on the ball? That might play into Canada's favor a little bit. Maybe the Nations League is a mirage and we see some sort of, flip of the switch, and then come World Cup time, they're playing with 100% intensity. None of that is an issue, and I look like a complete fool. But that is the game I feel like I look at and say, it's the opening game of the group. All the pressure's on Belgium. They tend to start out tournaments quite slowly. Let's see if potentially they can maybe catch them napping here. So that would be the game I'd look at as being the most important.
Come out and surprise them, huh?
Yeah. Could I try and give you some sort of let's say positivity that I found when we were analyzing Peru when they went to the World Cup, for instance? Sure. I was thinking maybe this happens the same with Canada. When you take a look at the other teams that they're facing, Morocco, you're looking at Croatia, Belgium, all of those teams, all of the players, they have other, for instance, objective that they need to accomplish throughout this mid-season because they're playing in the top elite European leagues, right?
Right.
Do you think that the X factor for Canada could be something that the players for Canada are looking more towards or are more happy to play for their Canadian national team? They're more looking forward for this game, so they're going to have that more preparation for those instances?
I would say so, yes. And especially when you look at last year at around this time, there was a lot of conversation regarding that January window of qualifiers because the MLS players and players in the Americas in general were going to be out of season. So what's going to happen in terms of their fitness, their match rhythm, all that stuff. And Alistair Johnston said to me that a lot of the MLS players trained, dieted, everything as if they were still in season for those 2 months. So I feel like this is a team that's going to be laser focused because they understand the significance of this opportunity and what it means for the country. So I do feel like all eyes are going to be on that. And you can see that with, for example, Richie Larea going on loan from Nottingham Forest back to Toronto FC, a familiar environment to be able to get back into rhythm in time for the World Cup. All those little things are probably going to help them, even if we're looking at things like 4 or 5 week layoffs for some players.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, fair enough. You've mentioned Alphonso Davies, you've mentioned Tajon Buchanan, you've mentioned Jonathan David. Clearly, there is a young, talented squad here. Who would you say that the rest of the teams have to look out for? Obviously, outside maybe of Alphonso Davies, who everyone clearly knows now.
Of course, yeah, and that's totally fair. Yeah. I would say that the X factor would be Stefan Eustáquio for me, because his commitment in 2019, I almost feel changed the dynamic of the team, in that when you looked ahead 2, 3, 4 years down the line, Atiba Hutchinson, who at the time was 35, 36, and he's going to probably go to this World Cup and become one of the oldest outfield players in World Cup history. Who's going to come after him? Who's going to be that guy who can just exude calmness in possession, orchestrate things, slow things down, speed things up whenever he sees fit? Stefan Eustáquio's that guy. And the fact that he is starting every week for Porto these days, he's been doing very well in the Champions League. He's going to be the guy who I think makes Canada flow here in a lot of ways, in terms of being able to calmly build from the back, being able to break down opposition lines, spreading the ball around and whatnot. He has been the X factor in a lot of games. And it's not a coincidence to me that in the 2 or 3 games that he did miss, and albeit it is a small sample size, Canada's fluidity was lacking. Whereas when Alphonso Davies was missing for the last 6 qualifiers, the attack never really skipped a beat. Now, at the World Cup against top-tier opponents, that would be a different story. But it kind of goes to show you maybe the difference in importance. I feel like Eustáquio is the man who makes the team flow. Davies is the one who can provide those moments of individual quality and kind of put teams on the back foot and make them think twice about maybe doing 1 or 2 things.
Fair.
Coming from a like perspective of, let's say, just fans seeing how the whole, let's say, younger crowd looks at someone like Alphonso Davies, and people who may not know about him or his role in the Canada national team, how can you say it compares to what he does at Bayern Munich? Just to try and give a little more perspective to like how important or a player like him can be different in the national team.
Yeah, and it's almost similar to, I think, the role David Alaba played when he was at Bayern compared to when he was playing for Austria, and that he was the engine in the midfield for Austria. He was a left back or left-sided center back for Bayern Munich. Still very important, but different roles. Davies definitely doesn't play as often in the final third for Bayern Munich as he does for Canada. That is the difference. He does start further forward up the pitch. But there are now a lot of similarities in how he's deployed for both club and country, in that he's given that freedom to roam inside from left back. He can go forward and have the entire flank to himself if he pleases. And with Canada, again, just because of the importance he has to the team, he pretty much has free reign to do as he wishes. So that is almost what I think is significant, is that, say you look at a year or 2 ago, he had a more structured role with Bayern in that, okay, here's when you attack, here's when you come back and defend. He now has a lot more freedom at Bayern. The more he has played, the better he has gotten. And even with Julian Nagelsmann coming in and almost giving him that freedom has helped him a lot. So it almost goes to show you that even though Davies is the guy for Canada, he's slowly but surely becoming equally important for Bayern as well.
What would you say, right? Because these videos that we are doing, that we're creating, is for fans that want to get to know every single team for the World Cup. So what is something that you could tell us about Canada that people you think need to know before the World Cup?
That is a great question. I would say that this is probably one of the more together, almost fun teams that you're probably going to see at the World Cup. And obviously there are going to be some teams that I think exude that personality, right? I mean, we always see whenever Colombia goes to the World Cup and they're celebrations, right? And whatever else. With Canada, you can very much see that they're all so tight knit, and that brotherhood, as they call it, comes through on their Instagram stories whenever they come together, in their photos, even in training, whenever they kind of, poke fun at each other in terms of, oh, who's playing this music, or, like, come on, throw this on, things like that. So that is the one thing that I think comes with winning, certainly, and achieving histories, that you're all in that together. But I think when fans see all the teams at the World Cup, they're going to look at Canada and say, okay, this is a team that really does have fun. But then when it comes down to it, when it's time to get down to business, they're locked in and they play for each other. And I think that that's sort of the two sides of the coin that makes them so much fun to watch.
Yeah.
Speaking of the fans, right? Obviously, I believe fandom has grown with the growth of the team. What can we expect as well from the fans? How many are going to Qatar, or if you know, or what can we expect from the Canadian fans in Qatar?
It's probably not going to be as extreme as Peru going to Russia when fans were taking out second mortgages on their home, gaining 50 kilograms to get the obese seats, things like that. They're not that crazy. I don't think anyone is as crazy as us Peruvians, to be fair. And we wear that with pride. But there are going to be a fair number for understandable reasons. This is history. There are fans who I know have said that, yeah, they've planned for this for the last year. Apparently in January, when they got the 3 wins out of 3, including that win over the US at home, that is when they started looking at flights, looking at hotels, looking at match tickets and whatnot. And they've been preparing for this. So I think there's going to be a decent number. It's probably not going to be to the level of some of the other countries that are going to be there, but they're going to be a pretty loud minority, I would imagine, for sure.
Now, I don't know if you have anything else to add, Buga?
No, not really. About Canada, no, not really.
Well, Peter, I want to first thank you for your time.
Of course.
And secondly, off camera, you said that you were going to be at the World Cup. So
Yes.
I'm looking forward to obviously your reporting, the information that you always give. So I want to, right now here, give you a shout out, and as well, let the people know where they can find you so they can stay informed on what's going on out there in Qatar.
Well, Diego, Buga, first of all, thank you as well for the invitation and for the shout out as well. Should be a lot of fun going to that World Cup, to represent Canada for the first time in 36 years and just covering all the other elements of that World Cup as well. You can find me on Twitter at Galindo PW. Same thing with Instagram. I'll be posting a lot of photos and stories there whenever I get there. Check out my work on sportsnet.ca, MLSsoccer.com, and I'm sure possibly a couple of other outlets as well. And even possibly on their YouTube channels, the TVs, the radios, all that. I'll be tweeting all that out, announcing all that. So stay tuned for everything, because it's going to be a fun but also hectic month coming up.
Absolutely. Busy man. I love it. And you know what? I know how busy it is. A lot of people do not see how much work will go into this, not even month, because it's before the World Cup and after the World Cup, you're still tying it all up together. But you know what, Peter, enjoy it. And I'm glad for you, man. Always super proud of you. Thank you everyone for watching. This has been The Engine Room. We'll be back with more videos before the World Cup, analyzing all of the 32 teams. Thank you very much, guys.